Hello, everybody. Welcome to Biblio Files, the little show on AADL TV, brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library, where we three discuss a different book topic each week, each choosing a different book that matches the theme. My name is Amanda, and I'm joined as always by Christopher and Lucy. And this week we are discussing the topic of read-alikes. What is a read-alike? A read-alike is if you read one book and you want to read another book that is similar, or if somebody is recommending a book to you and they say, oh, you liked such and such, try this one. So today we found a few different read-alikes for if you liked, you'll also like this. So we'll try it out and see how it goes. Christopher, what did you pick for today?
Well, it might seem like a little bit of a stretch, but the more I read of this book, the more I was compelled to make this comparison. What I read is Jhumpa Lahiri's book, Whereabouts. She originally wrote this in, I think, 2018. It was published in Italian, and then she translated it herself into English. She's quite an amazing writer. But let me get to the read-alike part. So I know that the world of poetry is vast and as varied as any other style of literary writing. But I have to say, if you like poetry, I think you should really try this book. There are several reasons I make this comparison. First of all, each short chapter in this book is about 2 or maybe 3 pages long. And Jhumpa Lahiri really captures one particular scene in the life of an unnamed woman in an unnamed city in Italy. It could be swimming, buying a sandwich, the first warm day of the year, meeting an old friend, or an overheard conversation or fight on the street. And she has this masterful way of summing up the whole scene with one wonderful line right at the end. And I just want to read one of her great endings. As I eat it, as my body bakes in the sun that pours down on my neighborhood, each bite, feeling sacred, reminds me that I'm not forsaken. I don't know what that is if it's not poetry. So it's wonderful. And within each of those chapters, she captures one particular emotion. And I really enjoyed this book so much. Again, I'm in awe. She wrote it in Italian, not her native language, and then translated it into English. So that is Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri. Lucy, what did you pick?
Well, the book that I would like to I was looking to find a read alike for is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, which is a nonfiction book that came out in 2010. And I highly recommend this book if you haven't read it. It's a really important story, and it's a really amazing story. It's about a woman named Henrietta Lacks. She was a poor Black woman who, in the 1950s, went to Johns Hopkins and because she had cancer, and they removed cells from her cervix that then replicated in a really interesting way and went on to sort of change the world. Johns Hopkins never told her they were taking these cells. They never told her how the cells replicated. They never told her how the cells were used. They never told her family they were doing this. The cells became known as HeLa. HeLa are responsible for the polio vaccine, for a lot of like the medicine that helped AIDS, for vaccines since then. And probably all of us have a little bit of HeLa inside of us. The big part of the story, though, is how little Henrietta Lacks ever knew about it, and the way that she was treated, and then the way that her children had to sort of handle knowing that their mother was out there, and how they never got any any recognition or anything, they weren't compensated for this in any way. So it really speaks to the mistreatment of, people, especially Black women, especially in the medical field. And that's something that's still relevant today. The book that I want to compare it to is a fiction book So if you liked Henrietta Lacks, I think that you would like this novel, which is called Take My Hand. And this is by Dolan Perkins Valdez. This came out in 2022. Though it is fiction, it's historical fiction, and it's based on real people and a real case that came before federal judges, and sort of had a big impact in the way that women are treated in medicine. But so this book is about a woman named Sybil Townsend. And Sybil, in 1973, Sybil lives in Montgomery, Alabama, and she just graduates from nursing school, and she wants to help people. She gets a job at the Montgomery Family Planning Clinic, which mostly helps underserved people from rural communities. Most of those people are Black, and she discovers that one of her duties as a nurse there is to travel to people's homes who don't come in and give birth control shots that are not FDA approved yet to young girls. So the two people she's assigned with, India and Erica, are 11 and 13. So she's giving an 11-year-old birth control. And the assumption behind this is like, well, they're going to get pregnant, whether it's because something happens to them within their family, or it's just, she is just struck by how incredibly wrong it is. And she becomes really close with these girls, and she stops giving them the shots because they haven't been, okayed by the FDA. And the girls are taken by another nurse who comes, taken to the hospital, and they are sterilized without their consent when they're 11 and 13. And this is obviously so distressing to them. It's very painful for them. It's physically a painful experience. The way they're treated is horrible. And Sybil is really upset about it and determined to do something about it. And the girls and their father decide to try to sue the hospital, and they get this lawyer to take it on. And the lawyer starts to do some work and discovers that this is so much bigger than just these girls. And this is 1973. And this is these girls are based on two real girls. And the lawyer starts to discover that this is happening all over the country. At this clinic alone, it's happened hundreds of times, but all over the country. California particularly has so many cases of forced sterilization that's happening without the girls knowing. And so the case gets much bigger, and it ends up going to federal court. And this is the part this case was a real case in history based on the sterilization of these girls named Mary Alice and Minnie Ralph. Their mother signed a document saying they could go have the procedure with an X because she was illiterate, and something like that similarly happens in the novel. Other girls who agreed with this, both in the novel and in real life, sometimes agreed because they were threatened with the loss of their welfare benefits if they didn't go through with it. So the novel is really interesting, and Sybil is a really interesting character. She's not a perfect character. The way she gets attached to these kids, she loses sight of some boundaries. And then there's a whole other section of the novel that talks about Sybil as today, in present time. And she's now a doctor, and she is the mother of an adopted child who's now grown, and she's looking to retire from being a doctor. And she hears that India, one of the girls she had treated, is now sick with cancer, and sort of pulls her back into the story. And that's how we get introduced to it. So it's a really well-written novel, and it's fascinating, but also it's historically accurate. It's based on something real. And then it's also still so very relevant today still. Like those federally funded sterilization programs took place in 32 states in this century. And the last state that repealed it was West Virginia in 2013. So it's just interesting to think about how these women, like these two girls in this book, but also Henrietta Lacks in the other book, have really had an impact on a lot of things that have taken place medically, both as far as mistreatment of people, but also the ways that people have been helped by what these women went through. So it's different because it's not nonfiction, but I think if you read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, I don't know if I said the author, that's Rebecca Sklootz, you would, it feels like a novel a little bit. The way the story moves is very compelling. And so I think that a good read alike for you would be Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. Amanda, what do you have?
Well, I totally agree with what you just said. And I think those are great read-alikes for each other, even though one's nonfiction, one's fiction. It's a really good pairing. So
Thanks.
awesome. Well, I have a completely different book and topic for my read-alike. And I did something a little different. I didn't just choose one book. I decided to talk about the book Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. And I chose it because I feel like, well, the book Uglies by Scott Westerfeld, it is teen, it is dystopian, and it's the beginning of a series, but it was published in 2005. And it was sort of one of the books that kicked off the whole like trend in like teen books of like these really powerful, like dystopian futuristic series, like The Hunger Games or Divergent, Maze Runner. Those are all series that are futuristic. And I feel like people talk more about those than the Uglies. And I've had Uglies on my list to be read for a long time. And I don't know why, but a couple weeks ago, I decided I was going to listen to Uglies on audio. So the first book is called Uglies, the next one's called Pretties, then there is Specials, that was the initial trilogy, and now there's a fourth one called Extras. And I've only read Uglies so far, and when I decided I wanted to read the series, I was like, I'm just going to read Uglies just so I know what the series is about, just so I can, it's a good YA series. I should have read it by now. What's wrong with me? And I was only going to do Uglies, but of course it ends where it's a series. So I'm like, well, fine. Okay, I'll listen to Pretties next, just so I have more context. So who knows how far I'm going to get in this series? Probably farther than I thought I would, just because of the nature of it being a fun series. So to focus on Uglies, so if you like dystopian and want to read a series, this is one you can look at. The first book is called Uglies, and it is set 300 years in the future, where everybody starts out as an ugly, basically an average-looking human, where your face isn't quite symmetrical. You might have a crooked smile or like different-looking teeth. So you start out as an ugly, and then when you turn 16 is when you get to turn into a pretty, which is you basically undergo plastic surgery and other scientific things to make your body look different than it was. So now you become a pretty. And they actually have two different places where the uglies and the pretties live. You are that different. You have so much more status when you're a pretty, because when you're pretty, you are perfect and beautiful, and you have all of the privilege that also goes with being a pretty. So in this book, the focus is on a young girl, an ugly named Tally Youngblood, and her best friend Paris just turned pretty. And so he is staying on the pretty side of town. I think it's called New Pretty Town. New Pretty Town, because he's a new pretty. And so he's in his dorm having a party with the other pretties, and Tally comes in and crashes. She wants to see her best friend, and she theoretically can't see him until she also is a pretty and is allowed in his area. So she breaks in, she gets to see him, and then she has to like break out and leave again. So basically the uglies, they like to play tricks. They ride around on hoverboards. They kind of live in the outskirts. But Tally meets a new person. She meets a new friend, a fellow ugly. And after hanging out with this new ugly, Shay, she learns more about what like civilization was like before all of this happened. Basically, there was like something happened to the petroleum. I think there was a mold or a fungus or something that got in the petroleum, and that was sort of the collapse. But she learns more about what life was like before and what possibilities there are outside of the uglies and pretties, these other areas that folks are not allowed to go to. And Tally's 3 months away from getting the procedure to become a pretty, and so is her new friend Shay. And Tally decides that she doesn't want to get the procedure done, so she ends up on the run. So the book ends up being an adventure of going beyond the area that they were allowed to go in to find out more about this procedure. Maybe there are other people out there who don't turn pretty, who stay an ugly, who live on the outskirts. Then they learn about this. There's a very fierce group of pretties called Specials, which is book 3 in the series. So you learn about these Specials who have more control over what is happening. So it's a page turner. You do want to know what's going to happen. It's a fun adventure. I wish the character of Tally was fleshed out a little bit more. But the book was not exactly what I imagined, but it gave me the same like feelings or thoughts or like expectations. The book did it for me. And I was glad I read it. And I also like some of the topics on the book because as a teen book, it was kind of cool to read about in 2005 about like the teen peer pressure and physical appearance and individuality and identity and what does being a pretty versus being an ugly mean. And those are things like this book takes place 300 years in the future, but those are things that like humans go through. You know, there's an expectation of what you should look like or act like or live or be. And so I thought it was kind of interesting to put that in this dystopian society and see how this group of people are able to handle it like 300 years in the future, which I thought was very interesting. So that was Uglies, and I'm excited to read the next book in the series, Pretties, and then there's specials and extras, and I don't know who the extras are yet, so I'll have to keep reading. But if you like dystopian or science fiction, these teen series like this, and you've read Hunger Games, Divergent, Maze Runner, like fast-paced, like moving quickly about what's going to happen next and resolve it in the end, I recommend Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. He's written a bunch of other amazing books for teens too, so he's pretty well known. So yeah, does anybody have any other thoughts on Readalikes for today?
Well, I've always been interested in Uglies, and now I think like I want to read it. It's so interesting to me that like successful dystopian books, they hew so closely to like what could very much be a possible outcome, and you look at how important looks are as compared to status today, and so I just think it seems really interesting to see what he does with that, and you've inspired me now to definitely try it because it sounds fun and enjoyable. So cool.
Yeah, they're running around hoverboards, and there's like outlying societies, and it's fun too when they go into the areas they're not supposed to be in. They start to see elements of what existed 300 years ago, like a library. They don't know what that is, you know. So it's neat watching them find these relics from like the 300 years ago. So that is us for today for this week's episode of Biblio Files discussing Readalikes. If you've got a great Readalike you would recommend for something, let us know. We always like to hear suggestions. You can drop a comment below. And that is it for this time, and we'll see you next time on Biblio Files.